I sat next to Tamrat on the floor. Steve was lying on Theo's bed, rubbing his back against the blankets, which struck me as a little odd, but I was working on being less judgmental. It seemed like we all wanted to act like nothing had happened with our dove. I knew that game all too well. The post-bully intentional amnesia. And I was willing to play along. I had been studying the skill tree on my data bracelet, and Tamret was next to me, leaning in to see better. She smelled like flowers and something warm and pleasantly musty. I need to level up, but I don't know what skills to pick, I said. Steve was wiggling all over the bed.
Go strength and agility, he said. It never hurts to toughen up.
What are you doing over there? I finally asked him.
I'm molting, he said. I get all itchy, and if I need to get rid of some old scales, I might as well do it all over Tamaret's prissy roommate's bed. You have a problem with that?
Leaving old reptile skin on Theo's bed, I said. I have absolutely no problem with that. I looked at Tamret. How did you spend your skill points? That's private, she said, smiling like she had a secret. The Rawrels were the only species I'd found so far that smiled the same way human beings did. Either I was completely misreading things, or many of their expressions were a lot like ours. Come on, I said. At least tell me how you decided.
Maybe when I know you a little better.
I looked at the skill tree one more time and sighed. I wish I knew what I was going to need, but since I don't, I guess I may as well follow the recommendations for the one thing I've already done and been okay at.
What's that?
She asked. Starship operations, I said. I then pulled up in the skill tree on my HUD and applied points until I was level 7. You'd think that I feel different. I put points into agility, intellect, and vision, but I didn't feel any smarter or more agile, and I didn't notice any of my vision had improved. The only thing that I felt was apprehension, as I went to my meeting with the Xeno Affairs Judicial Council. If there were a reason to be worried, I told myself, Dr. Roop would have warned me, presuming that he knew. I met Mrs. Price and Dr. Roop in the lobby of the nearby government in one of the nearby government buildings. Aliens of different species rushed all around us, many of them wearing boxy suits. Dr. Roop wore one, along with a gas giant Confederation pin on the left breast pocket, which I took as a sign of the meeting's importance. Mrs. Price wore a pantsuit and had applied enough red lipstick to make her look like she'd just been drinking blood. Her hair was tied into a bun, so tight I feared it would cut off circulation to her scalp. What exactly is this meeting about? I asked as we rode up the escalator made only of translucent blue energy.
The Xeno Affairs Judicial Council handles all treaties with non-Confederation governments, Dr. Roop explained. That means both the Phatic Empire and all non-aligned worlds that send potential members, such as your own. You can understand why you might be of particular interest to Chief Justice Junip.
Yeah, I guess, I said, but that doesn't tell me what the meeting is about.
He just wants to meet you,
Dr. Roop said. We'd risen up several levels now, and Dr. Roop was leading us down a winding corridor. We stopped at last in front of a door that looked completely indistinguishable from all the others.
There's nothing to worry about,
Dr. Roop told me.
However, be certain to be respectful. This is a high-ranking committee, and Junip is extremely influential. It would be wise to make a good impression on him.
Is he on my side? I asked, suddenly feeling nervous. Dr. Roop looked away.
He's on the Confederation side.
Don't be nervous, Mrs. Price said. You're in good hands.
She then opened the door and gestured for me and Dr. Roop to enter. Inside, I saw a space that looked a great deal like the conference room on the Dependable. On the far side of the table, standing and looking impatient, was a being I presumed must be Chief Justice Junip. I was surprised that no one had mentioned in advance that he looked a whole lot like a goat with a turtle shell. The shell was small and tightly contoured to his body, but it was bulky enough to make wearing a shirt difficult. Instead, he had a billowing cape that hung over his shoulders. Peeking out from the shell was a very goat-like head with a long snout and curling horns. He also had a beard. It would have been a more comical mix if he were not an impressive level 51. He pressed his palms to his ears, which I presumed to be some kind of goat-turtle greeting. "You know who I am," he said, his voice less goaty than I would have expected. Actually, his voice was low and kind of snooty. If anything, he sounded strangely like Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings movies. "I know who you are.
Let us not waste time with introductions and instead get to our business. Sit.
I chose an empty chair, and Dr. Roop and Mrs. Price sat to either side of me. The Chief Justice sat across from us. Chief Justice, I began, I wanted to let you know.
You are here to answer questions, not to make speeches,
Junip said.
I will let you know when I require a response.
Let's do it that way, I said, trying to sound like I was neither embarrassed nor annoyed, when in fact I was both. Mrs. Price glowered at me, and I had the sense she wanted me to stop talking. Junip seemed oblivious to all this.
The Phatic Empire, he continued, has petitioned for your extradition, charging you with the wanton destruction of life and property.
That's absurd,
said Dr. Roop.
It's not absurd,
the goat turtle said in his deep voice.
The applicant may have brought us to the brink of war with the Phatic Empire. What say you, applicant?
I didn't bring anything to anyone, I said. They killed the members of the Gurnari delegation and were trying to destroy the Dependable. Junip leveled his pink eyes at me.
I have reviewed the transcript of events. We need not recount them. It is enough for you to know that your actions have caused grave consequences.
The Fads may not like that one of their ships was destroyed,
Dr. Roop said.
But as they instigated an unprovoked attack, I'm not certain we can care how they feel.
Regardless of how events unfolded,
the Chief Justice answered, sounding somewhat annoyed,
the Phatic Empire states that because the incident took place outside Confederation space, and because no citizens of the Confederation were harmed, they have broken none of our laws. However, as Mr. Reynolds destroyed one of their ships, killing many of their citizens, they want him extradited to stand trial in one of their courts.
I presume this request is not receiving any serious consideration,
Dr. Roop said.
It is the responsibility of the Council to consider all diplomatic requests,
the Chief Justice answered. I felt something twist inside me. The possibility of turning me over to the Fads was actually on the table. I would be sent off to prison or be killed. I would never get to see home again. I'd never get to see my mother. I'd come out here to save her. What would it do to her if I were to never come back? The Chief Justice turned his goat turtle gaze on Mrs. Price.
As a representative of your world, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
Mrs. Price leaned back and folded her hands together as if gathering her thoughts. Nevertheless, I had the feeling that she'd been waiting for an opportunity to deliver her well-rehearsed lines.
The people of Earth wish to do all in our power to protect the rights and safety of its citizens,
she said, her voice flat as if reading from a script.
Nevertheless, we understand that Mr. Reynolds' actions were disagreeable within your culture, and he must be judged by your standards, not by ours. And as we put the highest priority on our continued good relationship with the Confederation, the people of Earth will not object to any decision the Council should reach.
I couldn't believe it. Mrs. Price had just said she wouldn't object if the Confederation sent me off to their greatest enemy.
Dr. Roop,
the Chief Justice said.
Your thoughts?
Dr. Roop raised himself up in his seat, as if to emphasize his considerable height.
To be blunt, Chief Justice, I find it shameful that you're taking this demand seriously. I would never, under any circumstance, consent to an applicant under my protection being handed over to a foreign power to stand trial. But in this case I must object all the more forcefully. The Fads may say that Mr. Reynolds is a war criminal, but we know he heroically acted to save the lives of those on board the Dependable, and I might add to keep the Dependable itself from enemy hands. To deliver him to our enemy simply because the enemy demands it would be the worst sort of cowardice imaginable.
Junip glared at Dr. Roop for a long moment, and then sighed.
I appreciate your candor, Roop. At this point I also think Mr. Reynolds being turned over to the Phatic Empire is neither advantageous nor advisable. For the time being it seems he is to remain here.
That was mostly good news, I thought, other than this was a decision only for the time being. My fate had been postponed, not decided. The three adults began to rise, which I clearly deduced meant that the meeting was over. Without a glance back at us, Junip strode from the room, his cape billowing behind him. Mrs. Price walked out, and I started to leave as well, but Dr. Roop reached out and took a hold of my forearm.
I'm sorry about all this, Zeke,
he said in a whisper, lowering his neck considerably, perhaps in a gesture of humility.
You're not seeing the best face of the Confederation. I hope you'll give us a chance to show you that we're better than this.
I liked that he was worried about how I saw him, not just thinking I should worry about how he and his kind saw me. He was a real class act, that Dr. Roop. I understand, I said.
Please avoid speaking to data collectors, the representatives of the news outputs. To that end, and to avoid trouble in general, maybe you should stay in the government compound for the next week or two, just until things cool down. The demands for your extradition are now going to be reported by the news outputs, and you might find yourself a little too conspicuous if you go out in public.
I didn't like it, but I nodded. There was enough new and wondrous stuff to keep me occupied here for a week, I thought. I had only stepped out of the hallway when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and found Mrs. Price standing there.
Well, that's a relief,
she said, as though she had not just tried to sell me out. Really? I snapped. What happened to me being in good hands?
Oh, I didn't mean mine,
she said, holding up her hands, turning them back and forth.
You don't want to be in these. I meant Dr. Roop.
Well, now I know where I stand, I said, starting to walk off.
Don't take it so personally,
she said, stepping in front of me to block my exit. What would I take personally? I asked. That you tried to turn me over to an alien enemy who hates my guts so they can try me as a war criminal? Oh, don't be silly. She sighed.
I'm not the bad guy here, Zeke. My job is to ensure that Earth makes it into the Confederation. There are billions of people depending on that, including your mother. I can't trade the fate of an entire world for that of one young man. I hated having to say those things in there, but I'm here to safeguard our entire planet, not just one citizen.
I didn't get the impression that she hated it at all. She had, at every possible opportunity, tried to get me tossed out of the delegation, and she was willing to send me off to prison or execution in order to succeed. I had no idea what she had against me, but I could no longer ignore the fact that Mrs. Price wasn't merely a bad chaperone. She was an enemy. Keep up the good work, I told her, and walked away, trying to act cool, though I would have settled for her not seeing how scared I was.